I hope so. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Wednesday class that shall not be named. We're here today to celebrate being Jewish and also, of course, preparing for the Jewish Food Festival, which will be this Sunday from 11 to 4 at Monterey Square. It is the 36th year we've had this food festival, minus 1 year for COVID. And so we're very excited to be here and looking forward to it. So that's the big event. We also have a books signing because there's a new book about the history of our synagogue that's coming out. We're going to be doing that the week after. But Food Festival next week and the week after, promotion of new book. And so today, in honor of the Food Festival, we're going to talk about something called Jewish food. So we're going to look a little bit at the history of Jewish food, which actually is obviously very difficult because we haven't always lived in one place. But we'll look a little bit, and then we'll ask you guys if you have anything to share about food you grew up with. Now, obviously, because we're in America, we have much more of an Ashkenazic tinge, although we do have people who are from Sephardic countries. As we know, in America, everything is a little bit more fusion-oriented. Oh, hey, Flossie. But we'll start by going back to ancient times and then come to the present. Because remember, the Ashkenazic, Sephardic, Mizrahi splits are only in the last, some cases, 1,000 years or less. So schmaltz versus, rice, those debates are pretty new compared to what we started with in the Bible. So in the Bible, obviously, there is food because, in case you didn't know, people did eat during the biblical age. Yes, people did eat back then. And what they ate, we have records of in two places. One is what we read in the Bible or what we read in other histories, and two, any archaeological evidence of food or bowls or that kind of, and there's plenty. There are plenty of pieces to kind of add to what the biblical food looked like. And we're going to start off with that. But before we start off with what they eat, let's start off with the kosher rules. Because what we're going to see is some of the kosher rules were definitively kept, but in other places they may not have been keeping all of the kosher foods. Hint, if you lived close to the ocean, you may not have heard about the fact that shrimp or crab or lobster was not allowed. So what are the kosher rules? They're expressed very specifically in the Torah. One, if the animal is on land, it has to chew its cud, kind of the regurgitate thing, and it has to have split hoofs. Live long and prosper. So a pig, for instance, has a split hoof, but it doesn't have the right inside stomach to do it. Whereas a horse does have the right insides, but it has a circular hoof. It's not split. So thus, a horse and a pig are not kosher. And so those are the basic rules for animals on land. So what you see is obviously deer kosher, cow kosher, goat kosher, sheep kosher. Am I missing anything? Those are the main ones that are kosher on land. Now, number two, they have to be biblically killed in a specific way where the blood is let out, so there's no blood in the meat. So you basically have to kill that animal and hang in it and let the blood run out. So we know that was a biblical edict, that you don't have blood. Now, beyond that, there are a lot of other rules that are less known. There's rules about bugs. There's rules about how you mix meat and milk later on. But for the basic idea, if it's on land, split hoof, chews its cud, has to be killed in a certain way. Very simple. If it's in the sky, the Bible doesn't give us rules about animals in the sky. It just gives us a list of birds we can eat and a list of birds we cannot eat. The birds we can't eat: the hawk, the falcon, the eagle, the vulture. So basically, it is very easily inferred that we don't eat birds of prey. And that's pretty simple because they tend to be less tasty anyway. I don't want to eat an eagle. I'd rather eat a duck. I love duck. So if it's in the sky, probably not a bird of prey. There's always going to be exceptions like an ostrich. And if it's in the water, it has to have fins and scales. So shark, no. Whale, no. Shrimp, no. Crab, no. Catfish, no. I don't know if they have catfish in that area anyway, but catfish is a bottom feeder, so it doesn't have scales. But then tuna, salmon, mahi, yellowfish, all of these are okay. Now again, as I mentioned, it often depended where you lived. If you were living in an agricultural cycle or society, that's easy. But if your livelihood is based upon the sea, some of those cultures may have been eating shrimp and crab and lobster or whatever else because either they didn't know about it or they ignored that specific edict. Now, as for the famous split, don't eat milk and meat, that is not explains. Oh, Ron, go ahead, please.
Yeah. When did this first come into effect? What you can eat and what you can't eat.
That's a great idea. So as to what they ate, that is easier. They can use extraneous. As to when kashrut began, all we know is we believe the laws were given to Moses at Sinai. When was Mount Sinai? 1250 BCE, 1200, 1300. At some point, traditionally we're taught that's when the rules were given. The actuality is that by the 10th and 9th centuries, we were keeping some, at least we had the rules. But we have to understand the rules of kashrut were not always kept by all Jews. We read about it often that some did, some didn't, some went back, some went forth, some didn't hear about it. So it took quite a while before these rules probably to take hold completely. But what we do know is things like pig were considered very antagonistic to Jews, more than just kashrut prohibited. So we also know that people often ate what was available. If you don't live near the coast, you're probably not eating a lot of fish. And you may get a little bit in trade, but you're probably not, if you live in a society that does not have cow, you're not eating a lot of beef. So a lot of it is based on what they had available and the rules. Now, the rules are kept in different ways throughout history. We can't always know exactly how they cooked things, how they did it. Certainly, we don't see the milk and meat separation in biblical texts. Were they doing it back then? I think there's some evidence that maybe, but it's a lot harder to know exactly because you have to go by what you can do. Now, what do we know? We do know a lot of the foods the biblical Jews ate. One, it's in the Bible. They have plenty of. Two, they find relics, they find seeds, they find what you need to do. So a lot of what they ate is not different than what they eat. But first of all, bread. We know biblically they ate bread. They ate bread all the time. Often it was barley. And then as time went on and wheat became more prominent, it became more wheat-based, but it was probably mostly barley-based originally. They had a wide range of breads. Lots of different breads, often made from barley, from thin wafers to bigger loaves to, of course, matzah type things. We know that sometimes they even had legumes in their bread because legumes were a major staple of food. So they sometimes also may have put a little fruit juice in the bread to make it a little sweeter. We know that at some point They started using olive oil in their bread, although olives were usually used for olive oil and other things, but eventually started using olive oil in their bread with maybe a little vinegar, as they say in Ruth. But legumes were an essential staple, especially lentils, of biblical lifestyle. Whether they knew the importance of protein or not, they probably had an inkling that the more legumes you ate, the stronger you felt. But they ate a lot of them. And they mix in what we would usually think: garlic, leeks, onion, some of the things they do. And then they also have vegetables. So they'd eat the vegetables. Sometimes they were raw, sometimes they were cooked. Now, what are some of the other things we know they had that maybe aren't as well known? Obviously, they had milk, but they weren't drinking the milk we drink because their lives,
Yeah,
right? Because what, Karen?
they hadn't learned how to homogenize yet.
Right. And when they did,
Pasteurized.
they pasteurized it.
Pasteurized, thank you.
Yeah.
That's the
But
word I meant.
eventually they'd still drink it, but eventually they would let it curdle and make it into butter and cheese. But they also use sheep's milk or goat milk. And we also know a lot of the favorite sweets, because those are mentioned many times: land of milk and honey. So they had bees there, and they had dates. So a lot of date and honey from dates or bees. And we know what the fruits and nuts they ate, because it's mentioned all the time. What are figs, grapes, the things we think of when we think about the Bible and the Middle East. Dates, probably figs, grapes, dates, pomegranates, and almonds are the ones we think about when we think about the biblical time in Israel. Welcome again to Karen and Stuart, who are joining us. So
There he is.
none of that is surprising. There's not a lot of surprising things they ate, because we know a lot of what they ate, and it's mostly known. We know, what do they drink? They drink wine. Maybe sometimes eventually got some beers, but wine. And when it came to eating meat, and they did have beef, and they had venison, but obviously goats, you had to be careful, because to eat meat meant you weren't getting milk, or you weren't shearing wool. So it wasn't like here where I'm in Texas and we're eating fajitas one day and ribs the next day and barbecue the next day, and the next day we're eating brisket. Now, meat was, unless you were very wealthy, was almost solely eaten for festive days, holidays, maybe Shabbat, but probably not even Shabbat, because that's every week. Maybe like holidays or for sacrificial feasts. So most people probably weren't eating meat very often at all, because they couldn't afford it. Karen?
What about poultry?
Yeah, we're gonna get to that in a
okay.
second. Yeah.
No, I'm okay. I was thinking when many years ago, I spent a summer with this family in the mountains of Peru, and beef was so scarce, but they had chickens roaming around their yard, and if we wanted something to eat, one day she said, "Oh, let's go out and pick a chicken," and that was hard to do for me.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Growing up in New York City.
Yeah.
But I had to pick dinner.
To be fair, taking a chicken and killing it is a lot easier than taking a steer and doing it.
Yeah, and you're not giving out milk. Well,
one person can do it, and it's done.
Yeah.
And you eat the chicken right away. You can eat the whole chicken right away. So
right, exactly.
For meat,
We can't see you.
You had to be using it for special occasion. It went to the sacrifice, and whatever was left, you smoked, salted, or dried it. So they probably ate a lot of jerky, but they'd use that jerky and they put it in stews and stuff like that. Birds, they did have birds. Probably chicken, but probably a lot more dove. The dove was a popular meal, because it was one dove was a meal. That was considered. They used doves for other reasons as well, but they did eat doves. They did have some chicken, and they did eat fish, depending on where you lived. And they ate eggs. So we also know they had eggs.
Flossie.
Flossie.
Yes, okay. Two quick questions. How did challah come about that's like our traditional bread? And when we're talking, one of the first things you think of in food is the apple.
Right.
We know they had apples at that time.
Actually, they did not.
Oh, really?
Apples is a much more American,
Oh,
European. They did not eat apples, probably. I mean, it's not indigenous to that area.
Right.
So really, you can read, and I'm not an expert, read. Interesting to see how the apple became so prominent. A lot of it has to do with the depictions of the Garden of Evil, the Garden of Evil, the Garden of Eden, the Garden of Evil. Yeah.
That kind of day, huh?
But yeah, it's always that kind of day. It's me. This is how. So, as for challah, challah just means loaf of bread. So we see that it's, I think it's the word is biblical. I think it's biblical Hebrew. So it is basically just mean the challah in some cases just a specialized bread that's set aside for a specific purpose. And so this is what originally it was. Some sort of bread separated for a certain purpose. Now, as to when we started braiding it, I am not as familiar with the history of it. It is not biblical, I don't believe. I think it's probably Eastern European even, but I don't know exactly where. I think it's Polish, but there are different names for different breads. They started to braid and knead, but the exact braids we use, I think and that I'm wrong. I'll have to look that up. That's a good question. That's a question I should have looked up before we came to this, just to let you know.
Rabbi,
Yes, Stuart.
do you think perhaps that the root of challah is from the same root as hallelujah?
No, I don't believe it is. I don't think that's the same root. But I'll double check. It's not, no, because it's challah. I think it's.
no, I don't think so.
I'm looking it up.
But I could be wrong there. So so bread again prevalent. Some sort of separated bread was used. Some for sacrifice for the temple. Some for special occasions. They have they have variety names for all these things. But I think one of the most interesting thing is that if you lived on the coast, you were eating shark probably. And I think if they had catfish, which I think they did, you're eating catfish as well. Now, we have descriptions again of different foods. We know that Abigail brought David bread loaves and wine and sheep, and they had greens and they had raisins. We know that they mentioned food in the book of Ruth and how you're dipping it into the vinegar. And we know variety of food from the biblical age. As we get farther on, still in the biblical age, but after the books of the Bible are written, we start to see also some other things, but we know, one, they were eating special foods for holidays. Two, foods were seasonal depending on the crops. So very different than what we have in America. Most places were seasonal. Certain foods you can get all the time, but a lot of things were seasonal. Now, as the biblical era ends and Talmudic era begins, apples probably become part of it. Why? Because now it didn't become super popular as we think of in Europe, but the apples are coming from Babylon. And where did the Jews end up moving? Babylon. So as the power base of the Jewish world moved in the 3rd century CE to what would be the Parsanid, the Sassanid, and then the Caliphate empires, apples became part of it. And obviously they're super tasty. So they became part of some meals, but I don't think connected with Rosh Hashanah, maybe starting to be connected with Rosh Hashanah at that period. Yes, question. All right.
Instead of apples and honey when you're saying Rosh Hashanah.
Right back in the biblical age, it would have been dates and honey, or date honey, or bread and honey, probably. Now, as we move out of Israel, obviously our diets are going to change. If we go to Babylon, we're going to have the type of foods they have, although in a lot of areas, depending on how welcome Jews were, created different types of diet. If you're more welcome and you can afford to eat what other people are eating, you're going to tend to eat a little bit of that. So if you look at the Middle East and what is now Iraq and Iran, Jews were generally more welcome in some ways, or eating diets similar to other people, whereas if you go to Eastern Europe, where Jews are often poor and ostracized, you're going to have a different type of food. So let's look at what is the most well-known food for us. And that, of course, is
Bagel? I don't know.
well, I was going to say the general word, Ashkenazic.
Oh, okay,
Ashkenazic roll.
okay,
Sorry,
okay.
you're right, the Ashkenazic. So for us in America, we are Ashkenazic American. We kind of we eat Jewish fusion, but our parents and grandparents kind of ate Ashkenazic Eastern European American food. And in Eastern Europe, we know that at first Jews were welcome, but then they became sometimes ostracized. So we see lots of food mentioned in Yiddish. A lot of them I've never heard of, because I grew up in a small town in Texas. Obviously, I've heard of borscht, which is not Jewish, but became Jewish. But lakshin, pretzel, and pastin, and I'm Laden and Beleg. I've never, again, these I don't know of. Challah, obviously, but it was called something else. They ate challah on Shabbat. They ate cholent, obviously, which became the most famous food, and we'll talk a little bit about why they ate cholent. And of course, kugel. Kugel's was probably the most famous dessert main meal dish in Eastern Europe that was also brought over here. So it's easy to deduce what they were eating in Eastern Europe because they spoke and wrote Yiddish and they wrote about it. And what we know obviously is that they ate foods that other people didn't. And so when we talk about Ashkenazic food, we're talking about the food of poverty. Now we have wonderful memories of it, but the biggest, when you compare the two major, you've got the Ashkenazic Sephardic, and you got the Mizrahi kind of as well, much smaller. But the Sephardic and Mizrahi are lighter, fluffier, healthier overall, and more flavorful. That would be kind of a general description of the difference. Eastern Europe, you are very limited on what you're getting. Like if you're living in Israel, the Middle East, or Babylon, you have access to a wider range of food and to spices. A wider range of spices because they could be expensive and they weren't always available. If you're in Eastern Europe and you're poor and you're ostracized, you do not have access to all of these things, that especially spices, that other people are doing. So you do what you can do with whatever you eat. You eat things that other people didn't. Chopped liver was not popular outside of the Jewish community. Brisket is the worst cut of the beef, right?
Loads of fish.
The fish, you're getting whatever fish you can get and you're grinding it up. Because most of the times you're not living near fish, but if you are, you're living near seas, you're not getting the best fish. That's for the fishermen.
Rabbi, what about kishka?
Kishka's the same. All of these things are heavy, breaded, putting whatever you can, concentrating on schmaltz because you can't get olive oil, so you have to use schmaltz. Chickens are a little bit easier to get because chickens were obviously is much easier type of food to get. So, and there's not a lot of vegetables. Why aren't there a lot of vegetables in Eastern? You have a little bit, but why didn't they eat? Did they not like their vegetables like me? I don't like vegetables. I eat vegetables. Why? Because they're healthy. But as soon as an angel of God comes down and says, I'm telling you now, vegetables are not healthy, guess what I'm doing? Never eating vegetables again. Brian, our chef, Brian Graves, his green meat, everything he makes is awesome. You know, there's some vegetables. What's the one I like that's Israeli? It's purple. What's that one called?
Eggplant?
Eggplant. I like eggplant.
I get the
Don't know the name of it, but I like it. So in Eastern Europe, you're taking the leftovers or the food people don't want, which is ironic because chopped liver today is a delicacy.
Yeah.
And brisket is a delicacy today. But in Eastern Europe, that was the worst cut and that was the leftover food. So you go to a butcher and they're selling the nice stuff to somebody else and you get the leftovers. Now, you have to salt everything. So they did have salt to keep it from spoiling. You could get some types of vegetables, but they had to be the ones that were not as popular, like carrots or parsnips, and you did have access to potatoes. Obviously, potato is the crop that saved Europe, and no different with Eastern European Jews. Potatoes were essential in everything. So you're throwing together potatoes and cabbage and the brisket meats, and you're grinding fish, and that's what the meal we have today. It's delicious. I eat gefilte fish. Why do I eat gefilte fish? Because my great-grandparents were grinding the white fish, which was not considered a delicacy, and they're using every part of it, and then they're putting some sort of gel on it, you know, gel, whatever the gel or spices they could do, and everything is overcooked. Everything is heavy, and there's a lot of schmaltz because that's what you're using to spice things up. Now with fish, obviously you got it when you could, and certain things as in Eastern Europe became popular for holidays, Shabbat and holidays, you're obviously eating your best, especially on holidays. That's when you're probably eating meat, just like biblically. So now, as well, if you're living in Eastern Europe, your religious upbringing is very different. And this affects the food you eat, as well as everything else. As we've seen, if you're living in Eastern Europe, you're restricted to what you're getting. If you're in Sephardic worlds, you probably have access to everything everybody else does. So what this meant was, in Eastern Europe, you're restricted in what you also learn. Like if you're in the Sephardic world, you're learning about medicine, and you're learning to read other languages, and you're learning about science, and you're learning a wide variety of vocations. You're living in the world. If you're living in Eastern Europe, you are very restricted. You're still educated, but your education is centered on Judaism alone. You make a living and you study Jewish texts or Jewish things, and that's what you did. And what else did you do? You wrote things. And what did you write? Laws. Lots and lots of laws, because you're stuck and you got nothing else to do. I'm going to write laws. I'm just going to write more and more laws. And that's how they think. That's what they were doing back and forth. They're talking, they're writing. And this is most obvious for Passover. Because if you're Sephardic and it's your Passover, what do? You don't eat bread. Very simple. If you're Ashkenazic, you don't eat bread and every single thing else. You don't eat rice. I mean, you don't eat all of these foods, corn,
Beans.
beans. which has nothing to do at all with bread. I do not cook, I don't farm, and I know nothing about household utensils for the kitchen. I know a bean is not the same as bread. I know corn is not the same as bread. What other things are we talking about? I know, what else do we not eat?
Barley.
Did,
You can have you can have barley. It just has to be not risen, I think, right?
did you ever have stuffed cabbage?
I had stuffed cabbage I didn't grow up with, but that's for Eastern European. You
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah.
Eastern European, you stuff things. Why? Because you have the lesser stuff and you use the extras and you got to grind it and juice it up a bit, and then you stuff it in something.
My grandmother made the best.
And it tastes good. It tastes good.
Good.
But again, it's not healthy. Again, if you're living in the South and you're Jewish, you are the least healthy people on planet Earth.
Eating it
Because
all.
we're eating Jewish food and Southern food. It's fried chicken and schmaltz.
Yeah.
You know, if it wasn't for Lipitor, we'd all die at 12. You know what I'm saying? But it's tasty because we're used to it. And as it came to America, they started to add something called spices to it. So the borscht or the brisket or the matzo balls or the gefilte fish, my great-grandparents' great-great-grandparents ate in Eastern Europe would be very different than what even my grandparents were serving, as we had access to all of these things. And they kept the rules were much stricter because you're living in your society and you can make rules that everybody have to follow because there's nowhere else to go. Where in the Sephardic world, you kind of, you don't eat bread. It's very simple. But even today, I separate. I don't eat rice during Passover because it's what my ancestors didn't do. And it's also because I used to be on a totally sushi diet when my stomach was bad. I ate sushi all the time. That's before I had kids and I could afford to do that. And so if I ate sushi during Passover, it would be no change whatsoever for me because I didn't eat a lot of bread because it's rice and it's soy sauce. So I still keep those laws myself. But so when you look at the food that we love, it is ironic that so much of this poor food that our ancestors were forced to eat became mainstream in America. People eat brisket all the time and have no idea it's Jewish. They eat bagels, which really did start in Europe, but really became more popular here. No idea of the Jewish influence unless you live in New York. What other foods that people eat that are Jewish that they don't realize? Latkes, potato pancakes, although that's probably made in a lot of cultures because potatoes, but there are other ones as well. So when you come to the Seder and you enjoy the memory, a lot of it is memory. Like if I had not been raised on gefilte fish, I would not be eating gefilte fish. Because for people who are not used to that taste, it is terrible. Cholent, it is so heavy. Throwing beans and barley and schmaltz and meat is so heavy that it's hard to really and plus you're just leaving it warm all day on Saturday. Now, when it came to kashrut, Eastern Europe, especially if you're living in shtetls or ghettos, very strict kashrut. Not as strict as today, because we have so many more options today, but very strict with the milk and meat. Sephardic, if you're religious, you also were, but also you weren't as crazy about like today. Today, we're much more strict in some cases with kashrut. Why? Because we have money. And if you have money, you can buy 2 sets of dishes and have a third set for Passover and have 2 sinks and 2 refrigerators and 2 ovens. You've got the automatic light that goes on so you can cook and see things. You've got rabbis going to factories to check to make sure that no pig actually entered illegally. They're checking to make sure vegetables are kosher and water is kosher and my saliva is kosher. So it is very strict in some cases. So it's really interesting that some cases, the more traditional people here are keeping kosher on levels that people in previous generations never could. So this is where we are today. We brought this Eastern European food like herring and hard-boiled eggs and lots of vinegar and all this kosher style food. And people came to America. It's not as popular today, and opened up kosher restaurants. Now, the most famous is the Deli, but other ones that did very well. It's hard to compete, though, with a kosher restaurant if you don't have a lot of Orthodox Jews. Why? Because
Expensive.
there's no blood in the meat, so it's not as tasty. You use salt a lot. You're restricted on how you kill chicken and all these things. So you have to make it taste as good. And plus, the most famous Jewish restaurant coming from Eastern Europe by far without even competition is the Delicatessen.
Oh, yeah.
That is the most famous way we brought Eastern European foods to America, and they were very popular for a long time. They're not popular today. Now, there's a few still around, obviously, that do well, but why are they not popular as comparison to 100 years ago? Because we're a lot more health conscious today. We understand the relationship between eating and health. And all of those foods are very high in cholesterol, very high, record high, unbelievably high. And so you don't see people eating pastrami sandwiches 4 days a week anymore, or eating chopped liver every day, or dipping your bread in schmaltz at every meal.
Oh, geez.
No, who eats like that anymore? Almost nobody, unless you have no choice, and that is not the case. So a lot of those Eastern European dishes that were really popular for a very long time in America, for 100 years, now it's eaten in moderation, which makes it very hard for restaurants who don't want you to eat it in moderation. So a lot of those places are kept alive by tourists who come in. If I'm going to New York, I'm going to Second Avenue Deli, I'm getting a kosher pastrami sandwich. I mean, that's what I'm doing. But I'm not eating a kosher pastrami sandwich every day, even if I live in New York. First of all, it's really expensive. And secondly, if I eat pastrami more than once a month, I'm going to explode. Now, what has changed recently is the Sephardic food is becoming more popular in America in recent years. It's not just Sephardic Jewish. You see more Greek restaurants, you see more Turkish restaurants, you see more Middle Eastern restaurants all over the place. And it's not always healthy, but it's a lot healthier than Eastern European foods. It's a lot of vegetables. It's a lot of olives. It's a little bit of meat, but not as much, and smaller portions of meat. And so that food is becoming a little bit more popular, but for those of us who were raised on Eastern European food, it's not as good, because I don't remember, I remember eating matzo balls and gefilte fish and brisket with my grandparents. And I don't remember eating what are some Middle Eastern foods that are popular. I don't mean eating falafel, hummus. Maybe
Yeah.
even I didn't grow up on hummus, but it's so popular. But other things like what are some other Middle Eastern?
Kafta,
What?
kafta.
Yeah, I don't even know what that is. I don't remember eating that. So a lot. But as our kids grow up and they have access to more foods, I think a lot of the Sephardic foods are becoming more popular. A lot more rice, although a lot of that has to do with Asian food being so popular. But one of the things that is interesting is goat meat and sheep meat is still not as popular in America. You don't get a lot of that here, whereas in the Middle East, it's still much more popular. It hasn't come over here for some reason, probably because beef tastes a lot better and everybody likes. So Any thoughts, Stuart? You want to say something?
Rabbi,
Yes, Flossie.
were kugels in Europe or was that American? The like Lakshan kugel, potato kugel?
Very Eastern European. That is definitely, in fact, they may have had kugels before that. So kugels were, that's again, I should have mentioned that, very popular food, mentioned in Yiddish all over the place. There's different times, obviously. There's the pudding kugel, there's the noodle kugel. But yeah, those are very popular in Eastern Europe. And again, as you can see, it's why. It's a kind of throwing different things together with what you have. You take either potato scraps or noodle scraps, and you either make it sweet or savory.
Yeah.
So kugel is definitely Eastern. I think we are the ones who invented it, but I could be wrong there, but I'm pretty sure we were. So,
Yeah.
and that's where we are today. So if you think about America today, you know, we're living in food nirvana. I mean, let's be real. Although I'm from a small town, I am from a small town. So when I grew up, we didn't have restaurants. We had Luby's and one nice restaurant. It wasn't until I got high school and that they really get. But the options for food today are insane. No other human beings in history have come even close to what Americans and modern Western countries have access to, because we have access to all kinds of food all the time. So whereas our ancestors had to eat potatoes all the time and cholent all the time, and they were restricted to certain ones. Karen.
No, I'm sorry. Well, I was going to say something about potatoes because we think of that. To me, I always thought of it as something so European, and potatoes are actually indigenous to the Andes and South America, and they didn't even come to Europe until, like, they came to Spain in the middle 15. I have to looked it up, but the middle 1500s, didn't make their way to Germany till later, and of course Eastern Europe. I guess the Germans brought them, but we think of it as so much our food, you know, kugels and latkes. And they didn't know French fries. I mean, French didn't know from potatoes until the 1500s. So actually, I think it was 1600 when they first got potatoes in France. So yeah, it's not really historically one of our foods.
A guy named Columbus took some back with him.
Exactly.
So yes,
or maybe
we were not.
Yeah, Pizarro probably. Yeah, but yeah, you're right.
I think Columbus did have potatoes. I think that could be wrong, but
yeah, I don't know. But they were brought back from the.
But we weren't eating latkes for Hanukkah in
exactly
the third century
in the 1400s.
Right. Potato was a very different animal because it was the one food that was universally found all over Europe. Once it started going everywhere, that's the population increase. So easy, so fulfilling, can keep you going. It was it's probably the most important food in European history, maybe in world history. Well, you know, in Asia, they had the rice, really, that was their diet. But potato was, and no different in the Jewish world. You know, if you're poor, well, you know, potatoes were what you ate. Even if you were rich, you ate potatoes as well. It was such a main sustenance. So, again, food is very interesting. As we see here, for our food festival, we're going to have simmus and matzo balls, and then we'll have Israeli salad. You know, we're not using really schmaltz. I don't know if they put schmaltz in the liver. Anybody here making the liver? Do they put schmaltz in the liver? I don't know.
You should use it in chopped liver, except nobody wants to use that kind of fat anymore.
Right.
So we substitute.
Yeah, so I don't know. They may have used it for that.
Does anybody, my grandmother used to use, she would make chopped liver but she used something, I think it was called knife fat. Is that right?
Knife fat, but that was a Passover use.
Well, she used it all the time she made a big deal of not using schmaltz.
Well, what is knife? I don't know what it is.
It's like a margarine would be to butter, I'm guessing.
Okay.
Some kind of artificial schmaltz.
It's an artificial schmaltz.
Yeah.
Is it carved or made from chicken?
I don't think it has any animal.
Okay, so you could probably use
margarine,
it for everything.
I'm guessing. I think it's like But I just remember her cooking with it, and she always made a big deal about not using schmaltz because it wasn't so healthy, and she would use this knife fat.
You know,
Just destroy her with her jar of knife fat.
I
It's,
never even heard of it. That's awesome.
My mother and grandmother only used it for Passover,
oh, well, that's,
No.
or right after Passover when we.
did anybody else
Because you
remember?
couldn't afford it, you used whatever was left
Never
for
heard of it.
Passover. For us, Passover was 8 days in a month.
if you,
I'm
if
sorry,
you,
Ron?
if you look at the cooking oil that you use and you look at schmaltz, it's the same amount of fat.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, just look
But
at
it's
the
not
fat
saturated
content.
fat.
I don't know. I
Isn't
grew
that
up
the
in a small
difference?
town, and both my grandparents, who I knew, were American born. So we didn't have any of these. I mean, we had gefilte fish and, chopped liver and the basic stuff, but I didn't have I didn't know what a kishka was. I
Right.
didn't know what maybe kreplach, kasha varnishka. I never heard of that until I went to Eastern Europe.
So you're like
Knish,
one
maybe
generation
I'd heard
older.
of it. We didn't have cabbage rolls. We didn't eat any of the stuff. I did have really good traditional Jewish enchiladas.
I was going to
But
say,
that had a lot of that.
yeah.
So we had some of the foods, brisket, matzo balls and gefilte fish for Passover, apples and honey. So we had some of it. But again, the farther you go from the Eastern European tradition, the less. And here in America, I mean, obviously, it's hard to keep these food traditions because we go out to eat so much and there's so many options. And quite frankly, I'd rather eat healthy Asian food than even traditional, Jewish food, certainly in bulk.
Rabbi,
Yes, Flossie.
eating how it's in your area, think when it came to harosis, we make it with apples, and in Israel, they do dates, a Sephardic version.
Exactly. And that's one of the, again, because we use the Sephardic Haroset Far Seder here. I never had that before I came here. I may have had it once, but here, it's going to be so much sweeter in some ways because of the dates.
Right.
But again, they're both good.
What's accessible?
Yeah. And again, it's always where you're from. Like we have jelly donuts because of what Eastern Europe, I mean, jelly donuts more Sephardic for Hanukkah, but they used to have sufganiyot in other places. It didn't have jelly. And in some places it did have jelly. We used jelly because jelly was for the poor. Hard to believe, right? So the sweet was often more savory. And then you've got some things that just go throughout honey. Certain, dates still used today, some of the grains, the breads. So a lot of it is still here in just different ways. Now, when you look at Passover, which I love to look at because it's such a great way, if you're Sephardic for Passover, what are you going to have? You're going to have stuffed vegetables, you're going to have vine leaves and olive oils and dried fruits and lots of chickpeas in various forms with lemon juice. And you're going to have, lentils, although those are indigenous to everybody, and rice. And if you're here for Seder with your Ashkenazic family, you're going to have matzo balls and kreplach, or not kreplach, you'll have matzo balls and gefilte fish, and you'll have a brisket, or maybe and then it's just interesting to see how it often depends on where you're from, the time of year you're from, whether the outside community allows you in or whether you're restricted. Do you live close to an ocean or a sea? If you live in America, you're eating beef. Middle East, you're going to eat goat. So it's, as time goes by, traditions are harder and harder to keep, except in America and the West, because we can get any food, anytime, anywhere. So if I want to eat completely Middle Eastern food, I can go to Olympia Cafe or go to the grocery store. If I want to eat Eastern European food, I go to the deli, or I can go to the grocery store. It's really amazing where we've come.
Rabbi, I think something that gets overlooked in our discussion is that we talk about our foods as the way they were cooked. But in fact, I think much of our food started not with the way we cooked it, but what was available in the geographic region to cook. And
Absolutely.
that, for example, gives you a good reason for difference between the Ashkenazic and the Sephardic tradition of what the foods are. If you look at the geography of where they came from, I'm sorry, not the Ashkenazic and
Sephardic,
Mizrahi?
Se-
Mizrahi?
no,
Sephardic.
the Litvak and
Oh, no, yes.
Galiciana, yeah.
yeah,
So
Galiciana
right.
differs. Starts, I think, with the availability and then moves from the availability to the cooking technique because I think it was largely the cooking adopted to the ingredients, not the other way around.
Absolutely. And for us, Eastern European food is put into one category. But if we lived in Eastern Europe during these periods, we would know the difference going from one area to another. I go to another area, maybe it's the same name, but it's going to be different depending on what's available. And yeah, and that's exactly right.
I think a good example of that is when I think in terms of herring, I've always thought is essentially as something that was soaked in brine and aged in brine. It was a marinated food. But when I went to Amsterdam, I guess the first time, and Karen will tell you I almost always do it now, I get a street herring, which is just a whole herring,
So just
not pickled.
It's just straight herring.
Bend my head back and it just slides down that way. It's the same food, but it's a totally different food.
Yeah, it's amazing. So we'll conclude with that. It's always a pleasure. The food is tasty, but if it can bring up memories as well, it's amazing. So to conclude, Food Festival this Sunday. Come and volunteer. Come and eat. We will both have Ashkenazic and Sephardic foods, American foods, and also we will have Mizrahi foods. Reminder that Karen will be continuing her Tuesday night sessions, 4-part series on immigration to America.
Jewish immigration, yeah.
Jewish immigration to America. She's had 2 sessions. They should be on YouTube if you want to catch up. Next Tuesday, the Tuesday after at 7. And then unfortunately that will be it for that series, but hopefully we've got another one later. A week from Saturday, Ann Woolner will be here at services and we'll be presenting and showing our new book about Mikveh Israel and our Jewish community. So we'll have an official book opening. It's already in sale. You can already buy it at our gift shop. I think it's going on Amazon or whatever pretty soon. So please look for that. And then we wish everybody all the best for Thanksgiving. We will have class next week. I'll send out a message. Sorry I didn't. And Karen, do you want to add something?
I just want to, when we're finished, I just want to share a cute story.
Please
Yeah.
start now. We're finished.
Okay, so while we're talking about Jewish food, so this was sent to me in an email by someone who took my class last week. And we talked about, toward the end of it, I talked about the Ashkenazi, the Mizrahi, and the Sephardic Jews. And he sends me and I mentioned also about the Litvak and Galiciana, Polish versus Lithuanian. Anyway, so we talked about that. He sends me the cutest story about something his grandfather told him about having been told, or maybe it was his father, he shouldn't date anybody who's Galiciana, only Litvak. And he says, well, how will I know? He says, simple, you make latkes. And if she asks for sour cream, you'll know she's Litvak. And if she asks for applesauce, you'll know she's Galiciana. And he told the story was very
That's
cute.
awesome.
I have to laugh that's a lot of, I think kugels too, whether it was sweet or
You can tell. Yeah,
or
you can
savory,
tell.
I think might have had to do with that. So anyway.
And again, it's just
Sorry.
everybody. I was in Nepal visiting and, go through, you're talking to families and they eat the same meal 3 times a day. The same
was
meal in
Where?
Nepal. In
Nepal?
Nepal, they just change the
Where were
spices
they
a little bit. Yeah, they change the spices.
Oh, that's
Same meal
interesting.
every day, just changing the spices. And we come to America and it's,
Yeah, we were in Nepal a few years ago. Yeah.
well, a pleasure, guys.
Thank
So
you.
excited to see you guys on Sunday. Come have fun. They're going to be a station for veterans, for the JA, for Fun Zone. It's going to be beer. Yes, Karen.
No, I was gonna say, I sent the announcement. I sort of downloaded it and sent it to the president of Osage Shalom and asked her if she would send it out. So it went
Oh,
out to
thank you.
the
Appreciate that.
congregation. Yep. So, yeah, you probably
Hopefully
got an email.
See
But yeah.
everybody.
To get it on it, had it on Facebook. So
Hopefully everybody will come. We'll see you guys on Sunday or maybe Saturday. Now, Saturday, obviously, we don't have lunch, but we're still having services, just to let you know.
okay. Okay.
So everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank
All
you.
our best, and we will see you next week on the Wednesday class that shall not be named, but hopefully beforehand, either Friday night, Saturday service, or the food festival. So have a wonderful day, everybody.